Towers rebuilt.
You can hurt us, you can keep us down, but you can't keep us down forever. And I think the rebuild would be a symbol to the world that the human spirit is alive and well here.
The spirits of those involved in the rescue effort seemed raised by the reception.
I think the people are great.
A moving reception for those who move the earth. Jeannie Moe, CNN, New York.
And they will be moving it certainly for many months to come. Jim and Colleen, back to you.
Garrett Cutley, thanks very much. Well, it is time for Jonathan Mann and Relisa Vasilova to step in and continue our coverage.
We're going to leave you now with some pictures of the all too familiar scene, the horrific scene that was Tuesday, September the 11th.
Stay with us.
Holy shit! Holy shit! God! Holy shit!
Moments ago. Watch this. This is the side of the building just collapsing. There you see. There you see. Now, whether that is the result of just further weakening of the structure of the building, or whether that's yet another terrorist attack, I don't know. I would imagine the former. That the building structure just weakens to the point where the wall no longer able to sustain the weight just caved. But that was the.
Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry.
We're building a strong coalition to go after these perpetrators.
It is my duty as head of this department to tell you that more, much more, will be asked of you in the weeks and months ahead.
As the Young administration grapples with the toughest of decisions, investigators search for clues.
And worried families search for closure. A nation tries to come to terms with the loss of life and the loss of certainty.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Mann.
And I'm Relisa Vasilova at the CNN Center. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America under attack.
They are points on a map and clues to a phenomenal crime. Boston, Florida, perhaps, government sources say, even Afghanistan. Investigators swooped down Wednesday on a Boston hotel and Florida homes that may be linked to Tuesday's attacks. Several people have been detained as material witnesses. Law enforcement sources say they believe 12 to 24 hijackers were involved in the attacks, with as many as 50 people taking part in the planning. In New York and Washington, authorities continue dealing with the remnants of the catastrophe while still searching for survivors. President George W. Bush set out Wednesday to see the Pentagon for himself.
Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry. And our country will, however, not be cowed by terrorists, by people who don't share the same values we share, by people who are willing to destroy people's lives.
CNN has obtained a partial transcript of comments made in the cockpit of one of the 4 hijacked airliners. As Kelly Arena reports, the conversation offers a chilling glimpse of the final minutes of United Flight 93.
Sometime before United Airlines Flight 93 went down in Pennsylvania, a microphone in the cockpit was left open. Air traffic controllers heard shouting, someone yelling, "Get out of here!" The microphone is momentarily turned off. It comes back on. Scuffling is heard, and again, a voice yells, "Get out of here!" The microphone is again turned off. When it's turned on again, it is clear the pilot is no longer in the cockpit. Someone is heard speaking in broken English, in what was described as an Arabic accent, telling passengers, quote, "There is a bomb on board. This is the captain speaking. Remain in your seat. There is a bomb on board. Stay quiet. We are meeting their demands. We are returning to the airport." While this was going on in the cockpit, we have information about what was happening in the cabin. One passenger, 31-year-old Jeremy Glick, was flying with his 2-month-old child. He called home from the doomed plane. He said the passengers were herded to the rear of the plane by a trio of hijackers, armed with knives and a red box they say contained a bomb. When Glick's family confirmed for him what another passenger heard, that a plane had already struck the World Trade Center, Glick dropped the phone, then returned to tell his family the male passengers had taken a vote to attack the hijackers. Glick wasn't heard from again. The plane held 38 passengers and a crew of 8. Kelly Arena, CNN, Washington.
Investigators are sifting through documents, home computers, and flight school records in Florida. Susan Candiotti told us earlier authorities suspect some of the hijackers received flight training there.
The FBI indeed has leads on suspected hijackers that were involved in this terrorist attack. They are still hijackers who attended flight schools here in Florida. And at this hour, the FBI continues to look at other flight schools here in Florida. Law enforcement sources say that 2 of the suspected hijackers, at least 2 of them, lived here in Vero Beach. 2 of them are brothers that lived here. One of them lived on this very street. Both are described as Saudi citizens. One of them is Adnan Bukhari. Adnan Bukhari, we have a photograph of him. He is said to be in his 40s. He is described as a commercial pilot for Saudi Arabian Airlines. Also living in Vero Beach, Bukhari's brother Amir. Both lived here with their wives and children. Now, this afternoon, we also had a chance to go inside one of their rented homes. This is the one rented by Adnan Bukhari. It was searched this day by the FBI, and according to documents left behind by agents, they seized a number of items, including a computer software, U.S. immigration papers, bank receipts, phone cards, a flight safety bag. We also saw a pilot's certificate, as well as a certificate that they had received specialized instruction on multi-engine planes. These pilots, we are told by law enforcement sources, attended Flight Safety International, a flight school here in Vero Beach. Law enforcement sources also tell CNN that the Bukhari brothers were believed to have been on one of the 2 flights out of Boston, one of those 2 flights that wound up slamming into the World Trade Center. Also, we can report to you that a car impounded in Portland, Maine, according to law enforcement authorities, was rented at Boston Logan Airport and driven to Portland, Maine. Now, the Maine State Police confirmed that 2 of the suspected hijackers were on a U.S. air flight out of Logan Airport, again, one of the 2 planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. The FBI also looking at 2 more suspected hijackers who spent some time both in Venice, Florida, as well as Coral Springs, Florida, which is located in the south. The 2 are Mohammed Atta and Marwan Youssef al-Shahi. Now, they stayed for a few days at the home of Charlie Voss in Venice, Florida, and they took courses at Hoffman Aviation.
Meeting in New York, the United Nations paused for a moment of silence to honor Tuesday's victims. Diplomats expressed condolences and their solidarity with the United States.
Today, both the Security Council and the General Assembly, today Wednesday, adopted unanimous resolutions expressing horror and revulsion at what had happened and pledging to assist the United States to bring the perpetrators to justice. In fact, when the Security Council voted in an unprecedented gesture, the members of the Council stood up instead of raising their hands to vote. It was an act that symbolized the world standing together standing behind the United States.
Attack one and you attack all. With that conviction, NATO's 19 members have taken the unprecedented step of invoking Article 5 of the NATO Charter. A NATO statement said, quote, each ally will assist the party that has been attacked by taking such action as it deems necessary. Accordingly, the United States' NATO allies stand ready to provide the assistance that may be required as a consequence of these acts of barbarism, end of quote. NATO authorities stressed there is no talk at this time of military intervention. Secretary of State Colin Powell is making clear one country that he thinks ought to help in the investigation.
We have not made a determination yet as to who is responsible for yesterday's attack, but we thought as we gather information and as we look at possible sources of the attack, it would be useful to point out to the Pakistani leadership at every level that we are looking for and expecting their fullest cooperation and their help and support as we conduct this investigation and as we generate more information.
Pakistan's President General Pervez Musharraf is scheduled to meet with the U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan Thursday. Tom Mintier is in Islamabad and joins us now on the phone. Tom.
Release of that meeting will occur within the hour here in Islamabad. The Pakistani president returned late last night from Karachi. He was there for naval exercises when the incident in the United States took place. He did come back last night and had about a 4-hour meeting with his cabinet, including his foreign minister and foreign secretary. The meeting today is more pomp and circumstance than an actual sit-down meeting, which may come later. There are 5 ambassadors from Brunei, Germany, Poland, the United States, and Singapore who are presenting their credentials to the Pakistani president today at the president's office. So they will have the opportunity to sit side by side and maybe chat, but a long discussion may be set for some time later. The newly installed ambassador has been here for about a month, but the Pakistani government is now accepting the credentials of these 5 ambassadors today at a ceremony at the president's office. So it is quite likely, as they sit side by side when the credentials are presented, that Wendy Chamberlain, the new U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, will have the opportunity to present Mr. Colin Powell's message directly to the Pakistani president. Ralitza?
And Tom, is Pakistan going to use its influence over the Taliban?
Well, that remains to be seen. There was a message delivered by the Pakistani president on Pakistan TV early this morning, basically saying how terrible this act was against the United States, but just how much they're going to do in cooperation with the U.S. government in the investigation and any other action that may come down the road remains to be seen. But I'm sure that this even brief meeting between the incoming U.S. ambassador to Pakistan and the Pakistani president will be an important one if there is a message the United States wants to deliver to the Pakistani government.
Tom, thank you.
The tragedy has sent shockwaves around the world, at times uniting people in their grief. Nowhere is that more evident than in the epicenter, New York City. CNN's Garrick Utley joins us now from there. Garrick?
Thank you, Jonathan. As we here at CNN, indeed as you viewers in the United States around the world follow the aftermath of this tragedy, we learn a thing or two about ourselves. And one of these is how we seem to be drawn to these often horrific images, not, I suspect, out of any sense of sensationalism or voyeurism, but simply because these images, we see them again and again, perhaps help us to digest the full magnitude of what has happened here. Now, from time to time, we're able to get new pictures, new images, or at least new perspectives of what has and is happening. And that's the case now, because often they come from amateur video operators, not the pros. These are people who can get in there on the scene of the action where the pros can't get for security security reasons. That's the case in this report from Jason Bellini of CNN.
A disorienting, smoldering, apocalyptic wasteland. From Jonathan Shanner's eye view of the World Trade Center disaster. He's a 23-year-old rescue volunteer for the Red Cross.
It feels really empty. It feels, excuse me, but dead.
He took a CNN handheld camera inside the wreckage.
When I was looking through the big crater, I started realizing that there's just probably dead bodies among all the debris, and it got to me.
Jonathan isn't sure exactly where he was shooting or where he was even working. It's too confusing, and instructions to volunteers, he says, are scarce.
Everyone's doing the same thing. Police, rescuers, fire, us, any volunteers from whatever organizations, they're walking through there looking for people, digging things up.
There was one picture he wished he could have shown us, but it never happened.
I wish I could have caught a rescue or someone coming out alive. It is what it is.
What it is indescribable, even with pictures. Jason Bellini, CNN, New York.
And that was the view, the perspective of one 23-year-old American during this day there, during the rescue operations. Let's check in on what's happening this evening, or indeed in the early morning hours Eastern Time here in the United States from Alessio Vinci. Alessio, what can you report?
Well, Garrick, it's been 40 hours or so since the twin towers of the World Trade Center have been collapsed after being hit by those two hijacked planes. And as you can see behind me, 40 hours later still a white cloud billowing atop the rubble of those two 110 stories building on the ground there. Hundreds of rescue workers, paramedics, police officers, all involved in this rescue operation, trying to figure out if there is anybody perhaps that may still be alive under that rubble. That we spent some hours earlier today. We saw several refrigerator trucks arriving into the scene, presumably to take some of the bodies or body parts out. We also saw a long line of dumpster trucks that were obviously being used to bring some of the rubbles away from the scene and make room for more trucks to go in there and take some of the more rubble out. We understand so far 3,000 tons of rubble have been removed early today. The mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, said earlier today that 82 bodies have been found inside the rubble. Only 16 of them have so far been identified. This tells us a little bit about how intense this collapse of this building was. If so far only 16 bodies have been identified, the rescue workers there are telling us that mainly they have been finding body parts. Of course, the number of casualties as the rescue operation continues is expected to rise dramatically. Mayor Giuliani has requested to the Federal Emergency Management Agency 6,000 body bags. Meanwhile, the entire area of south of 14th Street here in Lower Manhattan has been sealed off by the police. Several blocks in this area remain without electricity. That is why many people have been evacuated, especially the elderly people, especially in this building right behind me. As you can see, a dark black building behind me. And of course, some other people chose to live on their own. However, we also met some Manhattan people here in Lower Manhattan who decided to say, one person telling us, look, I lived here for all my life. I don't really feel like leaving at this time. Back to you, Garrick.
Alessio, I think looking at these scenes there and your reporting there, a question that comes to many of our minds is this is a 24-hour ongoing operation. Will be for weeks, months to come to get that rubble out and complete the search there. How long are these shifts, the workers down there? Are they working 8 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours? I mean, how long can their stamina last?
I think they work on 12-hour shifts, Garrick. That's what we've been hearing throughout the day. And I was reading one report earlier that it would take between 30 and 60 days, about 2 months, to clear out the entire area. I think what the rescue officials there are doing now is still in this a few days after the attack, still trying to go really slowly, trying to really hear if they can hear anybody from underneath the rubble. We heard yesterday there were some phone calls that were made from some people underneath that rubble, so perhaps the rescue operation is going slowly because they want to make sure that by removing that rubble, they do not create any kind of shifting. There are also buildings in the area there that are structural damages, and therefore the operation is being very slow. but certainly those workers have been working very, very hard, most of them 12-hour shifts, but perhaps some of the rescue operations there, rescue workers there, even working longer hours than that. We've seen a lot of people very tired, but very determined to continue in this operation, that they understand that any life they can save is a good job they can do.
Thank you very much, Alessio Vinci, and I think we can all try to comprehend or grasp, but 12-hour shifts under those conditions, perhaps for another 30 or even 60 days, 2 months to come. Back now to Jonathan and Ralitz in Atlanta.
Garrick, one question for you. People have been commenting on things that we wouldn't notice on television, that there's a strange smell in the air in New York, that there's a strange quiet. You aren't immediately on the scene, but even now in the middle of the night, do you notice that New York feels different?
It started to change this afternoon. Yes, it's still quieter than it is normally at this hour of night or early morning, because even at 2 or 3 a.m. Eastern time, the streets are filled with traffic. This is a very active place, needless to say. But the city did start to come back to some life today, and it will even more tomorrow. Just to take one example, tomorrow Broadway theaters will reopen. Times Square will have its lights powered up, and once again it'll be crowded because it's far away from the disaster area. As far as the smell is concerned, in Lower Manhattan, there's that mixture of smoke and dust in the air. It's just the smell of smoke and dust in the air. Although, as I mentioned earlier, at one point during this day, a beautiful sunny blue sky day again, the wind shifted and some of that smell was felt in Midtown and in the ritziest, most expensive parts of the city, Fifth Avenue, Central Park, the Upper East Side and West Side. So everybody in Manhattan got a whiff of that today.
Now the air is clearing. Garrick Utley, New York. Thanks very much. Ralitza.
John, people around the world are showing their sympathy as European leaders put up a united front against what they call an attack on the free world. Christian Amanpour reports from London.
Flags are flown at half-staff in England and around Europe. Flowers pile up at US embassies. Sympathy and especially shock are growing. In the wake of the worst terrorist attack anywhere, on a scale Western leaders say they had never even contemplated, newspapers talk of a declaration of war on America. Politicians from the world's democracies say that today everyone is American.
We all agreed that this attack is an attack not only on America, but on the free and democratic world. It demands our complete and united condemnation, our determination to bring those responsible to justice.
European bourses and brokers suspended trading for a minute to show respect for the dead.
Un minuto di silenzio.
European leaders have called emergency security meetings, and for the first time in its history, NATO has invoked its Cold War treaty that provides for all members to come to the defense of any one of its members under attack.
We stand firm, we stand committed. Thank you very much.
One after the other, world leaders stood up in sympathy and solidarity. President Vladimir Putin saying that Russia will observe a moment of silence on Thursday. German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder says that Germany stands with America and everyone who's for peace and freedom around the world. The same messages came from all European capitals, from Japanese leaders and the Chinese president as well. There were sour notes sounded too. Some people in some countries said the catastrophe should be a warning to the United States. To have so many people die, though it's unreasonable, is a warning to Bush and his administration not to make policies that bully other countries, says this Chinese taxi driver. Back in Britain, which is one of America's strongest and closest allies, Prince Charles came to offer condolences to the United States ambassador, mindful that many Britons working in New York are likely to be among the victims. Prime Minister Blair said that all European leaders and the President of Russia are trying now to forge a united front to try to identify, defeat and dismantle what he called this machinery of terror. Christiana Amanpour, CNN, London.
Fear is beginning to spread among Arab American and Muslim communities that they may become targets for abuse. As Telma Gutierrez reports, many believe that the backlash has in fact already begun.
Serene Sawaf is a 21-year-old university student. She is Muslim. She fears her scarf may make her a target.
Women receiving threats, take off your scarf or else we'll shoot you and go back to your country, and just awful, awful remarks.
This guy's cool. Samir, Adam, and Ali were born in California. It is home. Today, they play indoors.
I am afraid that they might start being mean to Muslims like they did 200 years ago to black people.
Tamina Tanir and Fidi Hakim couldn't take their kids to school. The school was closed down for security reasons.
My children go to a Muslim school, and I'm scared for their security.
It's a terrible way to live, they say. After all, they are Americans, Arab Americans.
I feel 100% American. I've been raised here.
I'm really angry too, because you have to understand that even though I'm Muslim, I am American, and I cannot stand it that they did this. I cannot see how there could be any good in bombing the World Trade Center and hurting so many innocent people.
But Islamic centers in many cities are reporting the backlash is starting.
We received reports from New York City of people getting pulled out of their taxi cabs who looked Arab, and they were beaten up, and children who were beaten up.
The terrorist attacks in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania were denounced by Muslim countries throughout the world, including Iran, Libya, and Jordan. In Afghanistan, Taliban leaders accused of harboring terrorists condemned the attacks. So did Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat.
We are completely shocked, completely shocked.
In Texas, 2 mosques were vandalized, their windows either shot out or broken. In San Francisco, California, blood was poured on the sidewalk of an Islamic community center.
I'm blown away because I'd expect that people realize that this is not American. This is completely un-American.
Adam says he hopes people will not confuse him with the bad guys.
I'm just gonna try to show that I'm kind and I'm innocent. I'm just a good person.
Thelma Gutierrez, CNN, Los Angeles.
The human cost of this tragedy remains uppermost in people's minds, but economists are also watching the financial implications. Richard Quest joins us now from Europe's financial capital, London, with more. Richard?
Jonathan, you're absolutely right. It is a sad fact, of course, in these situations that even while the bodies are being counted, we have to concern ourselves with the financial implications. But this was indeed an attack on the World Trade Centers at the heart of world capitalism. So let me now update you with what's been happening on the European financial capitals here in London. The world stock markets have been highly volatile since the attack took place, and it's feared, though, that the damage may be far more profound in terms of the markets. Officials at the European Central Bank will meet in Frankfurt later this day to determine whether or not interest rates should be reduced. You can see at the moment what has happened on the commodity markets. Brent crude is now down over $1 a barrel. Gold has also eased off. On the currency rates at the moment, the dollar, which had, of course, weakened, has now put on a bit of strength, now back over 119 Japanese yen. Meanwhile, gold is trading at 279, down $10.80 an ounce. Gold often seen as being the last store of value at times of crisis. Let's catch up with what the markets are expecting in London when they open in just around an hour, half an hour's time. Liz George is at the London Stock Exchange to bring us up to date. Liz?
Richard, the mood really here in London at the moment is extremely depressed and very, very quiet. I think we're going to see more of the same today that we saw yesterday, where you see an awful lot of volatility going on there, but extremely thin trading. The mood here definitely is one of wanting to conduct business as usual, really in defiance of the terrible acts that took place in New York. But the impetus just isn't there. And earlier on, I was talking to Jeremy Stretch from the Royal Bank of Canada, and he was saying that really on his trading floor, for most of the day yesterday. They've got big plasma screens, and half the time they were looking at the trading screens, and the other half the time people were literally just standing there watching the news, watching to see what the latest developments were, and the impetus just wasn't really there. An awful lot of depression, people really wanting to find out about their friends and their colleagues who work, of course, in New York. I mean, these two centres have been very, very closely allied, contact on a daily basis with people in New York, and really just a total feeling of shock and a total feeling of depression. The city, as I was walking into the stock exchange this morning, is a little bit busier than it was yesterday, and there is a feeling of wanting to get going and wanting to try and really, in defiance of everything that's happened, keep business going. But people saying that there's no liquidity there because the US markets are closed, and they're really having to wait until the US markets manage to get themselves up again, up and running again. Now, the bond markets in the US will be working today, but of course the equity markets are going to remain closed, and are probably going to remain closed possibly until Friday, maybe Monday. What Jeremy Stretcher was saying was that of course they can manage to start working again because a lot of these investment houses have got emergency rooms which are away from the financial centre. They're out in places like New Jersey, on the outskirts of New York. In Long Island is where the Bank of Canada's trading room is, and that's where the operations will begin to get going again once the stock exchange in New York manages to get going. But really, again, it's very depressed. He was saying people just don't really know where to price things at the moment, and the difference between buying and selling prices was just so wide you could drive a truck through it. So it's a real sort of sense of not knowing which way to go. Richard?
Here's George at the London Stock Exchange. Many thanks indeed. Now, David Björk, the marketing editor at Cantor Index, is in London and joins me now with more on the devastation to the global financial community. David, of course, Cantor Fitzgerald, the US arm of the company, one of those very, very seriously hit. Any more you can tell us? We believe there were 800 to 1,000 members of staff working at Cantor. We know that at the moment about 200 to 300 have been accounted for. Any more you can tell me?
Absolutely not, I'm afraid. This is obviously, our thoughts are entirely with our colleagues and their families, and any kind of announcement on that basis until there has been a full headcount will, I'm afraid, be kept in head office in New York.
David, I was just saying, it's a sad, perhaps, comment, but we do have to talk about what the markets will be making of all of this. Tell us the problems of New York opening. Richard Grasso, the chairman of the exchange, made clear there is power, there is telephones, but there are practical problems, aren't there?
I think people who are unfamiliar with New York as a financial centre, demographically, for want of a better expression, is that the rubble and the general devastation and the huge number of component brokers and banks that had offices in the World Trade Center, they will all have all their computer software duly duplicated. That's not going to be a problem. Settlement's not going to be a problem. The liaison that they have globally with their offices in Europe and also in the Far East is not going to be a problem. What is a problem is replacing the physical side of the business, where it can be traded accurately, where compliance can go, where regulatory controls are comfortable, and also safety, Richard.
I saw one quote from Japan, from one Japanese banker who said that one reason that there wasn't much trading taking place in Europe and Asia, because let's face it, European banks can still trade between themselves and with Asia, was that, as one banker put it, we aren't about to ditch our morals and speculate at a time like this.
It's a very Japanese comment, and I'm certain it's probably made in the spirit that it was made. Whether you could actually adopt those morals and attitudes for the rest of the world, well, I think that remains to be seen. But I think there is a general feeling that everybody knows that the US stock markets has led the world during the course of the last 20 years. And suddenly, when you don't have them, there is obviously going to be the reticence on the part of traders, because there has been some unkind comments like, oh, well, this means the United States is going to enter recession. I think that's a very strange remark, because we don't know the resolve of the US people. We don't know the level of contribution, which I'm sure will be from central banks, providing liquidity, etc.
David, many thanks indeed. David Björk from Cantor joining me in the studio. That's all from London now. For the moment, back to Relitza in Atlanta.
Richard, thank you. The U.S. Midwest still feels the impact of Tuesday's attacks, but it's an impact of a different kind, one that some are calling completely unnecessary. Gas prices in some states have skyrocketed after the three crashes. Deborah Marchini investigates why.
$4 a gallon in Ohio, and drivers waiting in line for the privilege of paying it. Gasoline, a relative bargain at one Conoco station in Oklahoma at $2.99, if you can get it, but there was none left. The highest price we heard about, $5.19 in Indiana. That came as news to one customer. It jumped from $1.99 while she was filling up.
I thought, well, I should have my car full by now, so I glanced up at the tank, and when I did, it said $42, and I said, whoa, for a half a tank of gas?
Ironically, the farther you travel from the attacks in New York and Washington, the more expensive the gas, the longer the lines. America's heartland is particularly vulnerable to disruptions in gas supplies because its system for moving fuel is overstressed. In the week before the attack, gas in the Midwest cost an average of 12 cents more a gallon than for the country as a whole. Regional psychology also plays a part.
It's like what I call the St. Louis snow effect. One of the things that we see in St. Louis is we have about 4 snowstorms a year. And they're typically not a big deal, doesn't disrupt traffic for very long. But if you go to your local grocery store, you'll find 10 registers running full open with customers 10 deep, all buying milk and bread. And I think American consumers have been trained to believe that if there is some impact that could involve the Middle East, you better gas up. And that's what they did all at once. And the supply system is not geared to handle that sort of surge in demand.
Oil analysts say temporary terminal shutdowns in Louisiana and on both coasts explain some of the rise in gas prices, perhaps a few cents worth. The rest reflects drivers' fear and a desire by gas station owners to take advantage of it.
Consumers should not panic. They should remain calm. Our supplies are fine at this point. There's no need to form long gas lines and thinking that our supplies are going to run out.
Gas station owners were among the few seeking to profit from the pain of terrorism. Though many travelers were stranded by the temporary grounding of flights, AAA says it's had no complaints about attempts to jack up hotel or rental car rates. A host of individuals have tried to auction items related to the Trade Center tragedy on eBay. The company, citing respect for the victims and their kin, has for now suspended sales of items directly related to the Trade Center and the Pentagon. The suspension will last until October 1st. Deborah Marchini, CNN Financial News, New York.
As we've been reporting, the search for survivors of the devastating attacks on the World Trade Center is continuing in New York City, but there's little optimism about finding any more. Officials in the city have asked for 6,000 body bags, a grim reminder of the scale of the devastation. Thousands of U.S. law enforcement officers, meanwhile, are involved in the hunt for those responsible for the attacks. Sources say up to 50 people may have planned and executed them. Several of the suspected hijackers have now been identified, with police searching a number of homes in Florida. 2 men who came to the state for flight training are alleged to have piloted 2 of the crashed aircraft. The FBI says the investigation is moving forward at high speed.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims, and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down. We also have identified, through a number of leads, principally at the cities of origin, a number of individuals whom we believe may have had something to do with the hijackings, and we are pursuing those leads aggressively.
We go back to New York now, and CNN's Garrick Utley. Garrick?
Thank you very much, Jonathan. We want to take a moment now and address perhaps what is the most painful and certainly personal question in the aftermath of this tragedy. Here's the situation. Imagine for a moment that you are living here in New York City or in the New York area, and that on Tuesday morning, your husband or your wife, your spouse or a brother or a sister or even a child who works went off to work in the World Trade Center. And you saw what happened, and that loved one did not come home. Question: how long do you hold out hope? How long can you realistically hold out hope? When is it time to let go? Who tells you it's time to let go realistically? It doesn't get more personal or painful than this, and here's CNN's Elizabeth Cohen with an example.
Andrew Zucker started his day Tuesday on the 86th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. After the first explosion, the one in the North Tower, his wife called.
And he said,
I'm okay, I'll call you back, and he hung up.
But then his building blew up.
If I know Andrew, he stopped to help somebody, and I don't even want to think about what happened, and I don't know what happened to him, but he's just not here.
But thinks she must, because like many people who stood in line to find out about their missing loved ones, Erica says she still thinks her husband may still be alive. So while Erica worked the phones Wednesday, her sister, Naomi Konovich, and family friend Susan Feldman went out on a search, one hospital at a time, starting at New York University Medical Center, where there were no answers.
Bellevue, I think, is on like 27th. It's only like 3 or 4 more blocks down.
After Bellevue, on to Beekman Hospital. No one had seen him there either.
Someone told us actually to go over to the medical examiner's office.
They told Naomi to gather dental records and hair samples in case they'd have to identify his body.
They don't have lists of people who were found dead. They don't have anything.
Late in the day, after buying a mask to keep out the dust circulating after all the explosions, she checked yet more public offices. Still, no one had heard of Andrew Zucker.
They said there were a couple of John Does in the hospital. We're hoping to find that maybe one of them is him.
In the end, a frustrated Naomi distributed flyers to the media.
He's about 6'1", heavy set with the big shoulders and a big chest.
While her sister kept up the round of calls to the hospitals, to the morgue.
If you do see him or you're with him, just tell him we all love him and just to hold in there, and we just want him to come home. We need him to come home.
Elizabeth Cohen, CNN, New York.
One family, one case, very painful one of thousands, if you stop and think of it, thousands of families facing a similar dilemma. The search for possible survivors, if there are going to be any at all, it will take weeks, perhaps a month or even more. Who is to say when it's time to let go? Who is to give that answer? Relitza?
And Garrick, certainly the rescuers are searching, but they're going very, very slow because they want to make sure that they avoid anything that could hurt any potential survivors. And also there are many risks involved in the area where they're working.
There are the risks there to the rescue teams. There are also there's the question of moving this material, which could hurt perhaps if someone who is still alive. They have to go very, very carefully. And it's also interesting and important, really, to understand that officials here are being very, very cautious. From the very first day, they have not offered any undue optimism about how this is all going to turn out. They're not making any estimates as to how many are believed to be trapped in the World Trade Center. They just say in the thousands. No false hopes are being raised here by anyone, and that's the harsh reality, and it's tough to take.
Garrick, thank you. And many major events around the world are being canceled or postponed in the aftermath of the attacks. The United Nations General Assembly decided Wednesday to put off next week's Children's Summit in New York. And officials at the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank say they may cancel their annual meetings set for the end of this month in Washington. Sweden is calling off this weekend's summit of leaders from 14 nations. Even baseball, the sport long considered the U.S. pastime, is on hold. All major league games set for Wednesday and Thursday have been canceled.
The U.S. government is also imposing new airline safety procedures after the attacks. Once they take effect, boarding an airplane in this country may never be the same. Charles Feldman has more on that.
Modern life depends heavily upon air transport. Government officials clearly want to get things moving.
All Americans want us to move as quickly and prudently as possible to return our national airspace system to normal. And we will.
But the definition of the word normal will change dramatically by the next time you take a flight. For one thing, you will see a much bigger federal law enforcement role at major airports. Some 400 U.S. Customs agents and 300 Border Patrol officers will join about 300 U.S. deputy marshals to beef up airport security checkpoints. Forget about curbside check-ins. And you will no longer be allowed to check in for a flight at a hotel or other off-airport location. Only passengers with tickets will be permitted to go past airport screeners, and passengers will not be allowed to board any plane carrying any sort of cutting instrument, metal or plastic, and that includes nail files. And now, for the first time in a quarter century, there is discussion about resuming in some form the old Sky Marshal program that placed armed federal agents on select flights from 1971 to 1974 following a rash of hijackings. The cost and feasibility of having federal, state, or municipal law enforcement officials taking over airport security from private firms is also being studied. But who will pay for the new security measures? The airlines? The government? You?
Ultimately, this kind of policy change in the aviation area is going to be borne by one of two groups, either the passengers or the taxpayer. In the short term, of course, it might be other groups such as the airports or the airlines.
And it is that short term that is bound to be the most troubling for the airline industry, already financially weakened by a faltering economy. Add to that, the airlines are losing an estimated $250 million each day while a flight ban remains in effect. But whatever the cost more security will be, safety and terrorism experts say from what we know now, it is unlikely any of the proposed measures could have prevented the sort of attack the world witnessed this week. Charles Feldman, CNN, Los Angeles.
With the Federal Aviation Administration's cancellation of all flights, you might have gotten the impression that there have been no aircraft of any kind in U.S. skies since Tuesday, but that actually hasn't been the case. Joining us from the Pentagon is Mark Potter to explain. Mark.
Well, good morning, Lisa. What many people may not know is that the U.S. military is actually controlling all the airspace over this country right now. All civilian planes, domestic and international, are grounded, and so the only planes in the sky right now belong to the U.S. military. Here in Washington and in New York and other cities, citizens have looked up to see fighter jets flying overhead, and that is known as a combat air patrol, or a CAP, as in putting a cap over a city. This is one of the fighters that we were talking about in Washington. The military is expected to return control of the skies back to the civilians, to the FAA, sometime later today. But right now, all the skies over the United States are controlled by the U.S. military. And these types of pictures, these scenes, are being seen in cities around the country. Now, elsewhere, the U.S. military is has put some warships and aircraft carriers out. They have been put out along the West Coast and the East Coast. Along the East Coast, 2 carriers and 5 warships. On the West Coast, 1 carrier and 14 warships. That also covers Hawaii. Now, here at the Pentagon itself, even this morning, are still out there in the rubble. They're going through the area, combing through the rubble. They do not expect to find any survivors here, but they say that around 200 people died in the attack, and they are now searching for the bodies, for the remains. The FBI is also here looking for evidence to help build its criminal case. And officials are also out looking for the black boxes, the voice and the data recorders from the aircraft. And it's believed that the discovery of those boxes could be very important and perhaps could answer the question of whether the hijackers actually intended first to attack the White House before turning the plane toward the Pentagon. And that is still being debated as to whether that was the case, and perhaps those black boxes, if found, could answer that. So a lot of things are going on here at the Pentagon, and probably most importantly for the officials here at the Pentagon, they are saying that the building will be fully operational tomorrow. At least all personnel will be here tomorrow, although half the building is shut down, shut off, cordoned off by armed guards because of the attack earlier this week. Back to you.
Mark, can you tell us more about the scene, the mood at the Pentagon? We've had this picture of the Pentagon with a huge American flag. Can you tell us something more about the mood?
Well, there's a sense of pride here in what they do and a resolve to do what needs to be done next. We don't have any sense of a timetable on that. But there are a lot of people who are walking around this building talking about what happened to them. We had a captain walk in here talking about where she was when the plane struck, and also talking about the fact that her husband, who also works in the building, was very near the spot where the plane hit. And she talked about that moment when she placed the call to her husband to find out what happened to him. The same sort of stories that we hear in New York are being heard here. When it all boils down, it's a human story more than anything else.
Mark, thank you.
And for every victim of Tuesday's attack, there are many broken hearts. Families and friends are beginning to come forward now to give a human face to the tragedy. They're telling the stories of the loved ones they've lost.
This is a painful time for my family and all of America. My brother was Charles F. Burlingame III. He was the captain of American Airlines Flight 77. Chick was a Naval Academy graduate appointed by the President of the United States. He was a Navy fighter pilot and a recently retired decorated captain in the U.S. Naval Reserve, and was a seasoned captain for American Airlines. He grew up right here in Southern California, graduating from Anaheim High School. He was a longtime Angels fan, and he loved the Lakers. Today was his birthday. He would have been 52 years old. He was a beloved son, father, husband, brother, and friend.
A long healing process is also beginning for those who did not perish in the attacks. Every survivor has a story, as our colleague Paul Azan learned a short time ago.
We were on the 98th floor of 2 World Trade Center. It was about a few minutes to 9. We were at our desks, and the person who sits behind me, thank God, Sandra, was the first to see the flames that were coming from the impact from 1 World Trade Center. And she screamed, "It's a bomb, let's get out of here." And that just sent us all running. We ran to the staircase. We ran down 20 flights of stairs from 98 to 78. And I was so lucky I got on the first elevator down. And it's the express elevator down to floor 1. When we got to floor 1, we had people telling us to just get out of there, get out of there. And as soon as we got to the door leading to the outside, we heard this noise. I call it the sound of destruction, because that's all you could really think that it was. And you just heard this massive sound. What I later learned was the plane crashing into the building, and debris falling, and people screaming.
Important players ever since Tuesday's dramatic events include the emergency workers who've risked their lives to help. One New York doctor rushed to the area of the Twin Towers carrying only his medical bag and his video camera, and we were able to show you some of the footage Dr. Mark Heath shot on Tuesday shortly after the disaster. Now we've had a chance to talk to him. Here's his story in his own words.
They told me just to wait here at this semi-staging area. See if I can help, so that's what I'm doing. My name's Mark Heath. I'm a cardiac anesthesiologist at Columbia Presbyterian on 168th Street. We saw that 2 planes had flown into the World Trade Center. Thought that they would need all hands on deck. So I hopped into some scrubs and grabbed some medical stuff and just grabbed, an ambulance stopped. I hopped in. Maybe leave the keys in the car so they can move it if they have to. Is there a staging area?
They're evacuating this whole area.
Yeah, but they had people who are hurt, right? They got to pull them out.
Estimate is we probably lost 200 firefighters.
Oh my God.
And God knows how many thousands of people.
Yeah. Okay. So you want me to wait right here? Okay.
And stay away from any other high-rise building.
Okay. Let's just station up right here, okay? All right. Why don't we set up? We were instructed by a fire chief to start setting up a staging area right there. Then the second building came down. I videoed what I could, got behind a car. I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. Everything went black. My eyes are open, and unless I've been blinded, it is black as night. Just tried to breathe. I was behind a car. I tried to smash one of the car windows so that I could climb into the car and get some fresh air, but I couldn't break the window, so just sort of went down into the gutter under the car. I'm sorry I came down. I just had to help people. I think I actually said into the microphone, I sort of apologized to my family for going down and trying to help, because I really didn't think I was going to make it out. Okay, I'm going to have to go find people who need help. I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Yeah. Can I get a toot? I'm just need a couple of clean breaths. It was hard to see. Everybody's eyes were full of dust and stinging, so it's actually quite hard to see anything. Okay. Back to you. It's 10:41 a.m. I can't do very much because I can't see. My eyes are full of stuff. There was initially complete disarray. All the emergency crews, the firemen, the policemen. Do you have an extra mask? No, I just gave it out. You all right now? Yeah, I'm good. See if we can help anybody. They won't let me go any closer. No one can go in to get the people out. There's small explosions still going on. So they have hurt people over there?
Yeah, they got people over there. We've been pulling out. We've done about 3 trips already also.
Okay. Having seen the buildings come down, I was expecting an enormous number of casualties, and it was striking how few injured people there actually were. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people who were in the building perished in the building.
And nobody moving on the Bell Parkway on the westbound side up and beyond Pennsylvania Avenue.
It's not a thing that you think about. You just move, try to get out of the way. That's it. Be thankful that I wasn't in closer. The bravery of the people who went in there is something else. Yeah. It's just a wasteland.
The words and images of volunteer rescuer Dr. Mark Heath.
For all the people directly touched by the devastating attacks, many others were simply touched from a distance. Across the country, they're coming together to remember the victims and pray.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
Members of Congress held a vigil Wednesday in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. Lawmakers from both parties are expressing solidarity in the face of tragedy. A public memorial was held just outside the White House Wednesday night. One man said he turned out to support President Bush as he decides how to respond to the attacks. 1,000 people gathered in New York's Washington Square Park, not far from the site of the devastation. They held a candlelight vigil to remember the victims. Officials have said they expect the death toll to reach into the thousands. The coordinated attacks on New York and Washington did more than just physical damage. They shattered the American assumption that bad things just don't happen here. As Ann McDermott reports, many people in the U.S. have been left ill at ease.
These visitors are stuck in L.A., so they idle over breakfast and hope for open airports, which scares them to death.
Like right now, in this moment, I'm just not ready to get on a plane.
So she's going to drive from California to Maryland, and everyone at this table understands.
We're going to be nervous for a long time.
Maybe only the littlest among us are not, but listen to this little one's mother.
The scary thing being what's going to happen next, and knowing this is just the beginning, and that there's going to be something that's going to happen next. We don't know what that is.
Maybe another high-rise plane crash? Images like this give magazine editor Wayne Friedman, in his own high-rise, lots.
And I realized, whoa, yeah, that's a consideration. That's something I should be wary of.
But Friedman said this image was worse.
That's when it really affected me, when I was watching these people dangling off the edge.
People are scared, but most say they won't let it take over their lives. Like this Russian immigrant, now a U.S. citizen.
I have been in Italy, I have been in Austria,
I saw Europe. I lived 32 years in Russia, but this is the best place in the world.
But this best place in the world is different now. Just ask the people at this seniors complex in Los Angeles. People like Jules Berlinski, who landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day, but never saw anything like this. Ask Beatrice Lowe, who lived in New York, loved its skyline, loved the Twin Towers.
It was so beautiful. Then this happens. God, where are you?
Berlinski has a question for the terrorists.
Wherever they are now, I'd like to ask them, was it worth it?
Ann McDermott, CNN, Los Angeles.
Yeah, they told us.
Attacks on the United States. A nation grapples with the horror that life may never be the same again.
And while officials conduct a global manhunt for those involved in the devastating terror.
He was an exemplary human being. He was a hero long before this happened, and he was a hero to our entire family.
And relatives share the pain of the loved ones they have lost.
Hello, I'm Relitza Vasilova.
And I'm Jonathan Mann at the CNN Center. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America under attack.
More details are emerging as the massive investigation of the attacks in New York and Washington proceeds. Law enforcement sources are saying as many as 50 people may have been involved in the planning and execution of the attacks. The FBI is assuming between 12 and 14 hijackers were involved. On a tip from the FBI, German police searched an apartment in Hamburg where two men believed to be linked to the attacks used to live. Police also detained several people for questioning. Earlier, the FBI swarmed into a Boston hotel, taking several people there into custody for questioning. And in Florida, investigators are looking through documents, home computers, and flight school records. Officials believe some of the hijackers received flight training in Florida.
As rescue workers search for survivors and victims, New York authorities were briefly distracted by a bomb scare at the Empire State Building a few hours ago. Authorities, or rather thousands of people, were evacuated from the building and surrounding streets, but it turned out to be a false alarm. Meanwhile, the grim work continued at the site of New York's once proud Twin Towers. Only 5 survivors were rescued Wednesday. One New York City firefighter says emergency workers have to be prepared for the worst.
It's a lot of devastation, but we have to deal with it. It's something that we have to do. I mean, nobody really prepares for anything on this kind of scale. And, every news we hear is just more and more bad news.
New York Governor George Pataki and U.S. Senators Charles Schumer and Hillary Rodham Clinton joined New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani as he pledged to rebuild the World Trade Center.
We have to all work together now and work together to make sure that we save as many lives as possible, rescue the people that we can rescue, and rebuild the city of New York and the World Trade Center to be even greater and more wonderful and more beautiful than it was before.
We're going to show the rest of the nation, we're going to show the rest of the world that the New Yorkers are not intimidated by terrorism, that we don't surrender to this type of cowardly act, but we will come back stronger than ever.
For his part, U.S. President George W. Bush visited the scene of the attack on the Pentagon. He said he was overwhelmed by the devastation.
Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry. And our country will, however, not be cowed by terrorists, by people who don't share the same values we share, by people who are willing to destroy people's lives.
The United States says it wants to form a coalition to not only find those responsible for these attacks, but to root out and eliminate terrorism as a whole.
We're building a strong coalition to go after these perpetrators, but more broadly, to go after terrorism wherever we find it in the world. It's a scourge not only against the United States, but against civilization, and it must be brought to an end.
U.S. officials acknowledge the rules of engagement have changed.
We are, in a sense, seeing the definition of a new battlefield in the world, a 21st century battlefield. And it is a different kind of conflict. It is something that is not unique to this century, to be sure, but it is, given our geography and given our circumstance, it is in a major sense new for this country.
President Bush and his top aides spent much of Wednesday lining up international support for a U.S. response to the attacks. Much of that support was forthcoming. At an emergency meeting in Brussels, NATO made a decision that could pave the way for a collective response to the carnage.
On September the 12th, the North Atlantic Council met again in response to the appalling attacks perpetrated yesterday against the United States of America. The Council agreed that if it is determined that this attack was directed from abroad against the United States, it shall be regarded as an action covered by Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which states that an armed attack against one or more of the allies in Europe or in North America shall be considered an attack against them all.
NATO's decision opens the way for the first use in the 52-year history of the alliance of a provision stating, as we've just heard, an attack on one NATO state is an attack against everyone. U.S. stock markets will remain closed Thursday. New York Stock Exchange Chairman Richard Grasso says the exchange will open no later than Monday, though. The stock market shutdown is the longest since the outbreak of World War I. It kept markets closed from July to November of 1914. Meanwhile, the Federal Aviation Administration allowed a limited number of commercial flights Wednesday, this after the grounding of the entire U.S. commercial fleet Tuesday. The U.S. Transportation Secretary said most flights diverted on Tuesday could finish their routes as soon as airports meet tough new security measures.
In New York, a scene of unimaginable devastation. A city famous for its vitality and confidence is dazed and somber. From above the wafting smoke of lower Manhattan, we're joined now by Garrick Utley. Garrick.
Yes, good morning again. Really, it's here in New York. A question about a rather strange scene, perhaps, on Tuesday morning down here in lower Manhattan, just after that plane flew into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The unusual sight for most people was this. As streams of workers in the tower were trying to race out into the streets to save themselves from the flames, others were racing in. Who were they? Well, the answer is clearly they're members of the New York City Fire Department, men and women racing in, climbing the stairs, not only to fight the fire, which was so far up in the building they probably couldn't reach it quickly, but to evacuate as many people as possible. Why do they do that, these firemen and firewomen? And we know the bottom line on this, the human cost of it. Approximately 300 members of the New York City Fire Department have been lost. We want to take a moment right now to hear from two of them, a fireman and a firewoman.
For about the past 10 years, Amy and I have been working together as a documentary film crew, and we specialize in the emergency services. They'll have to pump, millions of gallons of water onto this fire in order to put it out. It's the worst type of fire to put out because it's so deeply seated. The overwhelming smell of the fire is that of burning electrical wires.
You inhale it, and I don't even know how to describe the stench. It's filth and it's degradation. I don't know what the overall damage would be on a person's lungs if they were out there working in it every day.
We're still in the midst of trying to put the fires out and get people.
It appears to have been a pancake collapse, which is floor upon floor upon floor falling on top of each other all the way down. The fire was burning so hot when it hit the upper floors that it actually melted and the structure just came down on top of itself.
Building number 5 is probably going to come down completely within the next couple of days, I would imagine. As it settles and as it comes tumbling down, it begins to make noises as if the building is crying. The various moans that the building makes as the steel buckles and the bricks begin to collapse.
Seeing the firefighters all sitting in a row lined up along the curb coming out from Building 5 when we left, they were filthy, they were exhausted, they were emotionally wrought. There is a lot of danger. None of our firefighting training encompasses acts of war, so we need to be very careful.
Firefighters, law enforcement, paramedics, we are the first responders on any terrorism incident here in the United States. It's not the military. And we need to begin thinking like the military thinks. And to have 300 of our brothers and sisters perish in a single incident is something that we can't even fathom. It'll be years before these firefighters will be able to go back to work and with the same attitude that they had before.
By the way, the building number 5 the firefighters were referring to is a 5 World Trade Plaza. That's a 9-story building, which was also damaged and was burning. And as you heard, they're afraid that it may come tumbling down too. Let's get some more insights as to the rescue operation currently underway, what is actually happening there, what it is like to be involved in that operation from a volunteer. Kevin McGarry, who has been on the scene working, is with us by telephone. Kevin, good evening, or good morning, I should say. Tell us a bit about what you've been doing down there in Lower Manhattan.
Well, I spent about 15 hours in Lower Manhattan from early this morning until about 10 p.m. this evening in the rescue efforts and recovering bodies, primarily bodies. I didn't see anyone alive in the 15 hours I was there, although I was able to assist in the rescue of approximately 6 bodies and a lot of body parts.
It must be pretty grim, very difficult under these circumstances. I think all of us can understand that and really appreciate what you and your colleagues are doing. Tell us a bit about what your colleagues, your fellow workers are saying. I mean, how much optimism, how much hope do they hold out when you're confronted with that rubble, that mountain of rubble?
The mountain of rubble is unfortunately being sifted through by the handful. Down deep inside of 3-4 stories down below into the garage area, we're removing the debris by hand into 5-gallon buckets, handing them up and being dumped and sifted through a second time, looking for any sign of body parts or jewelry, watches, any type of wallets, identification, anything at all.
You said, Kevin, that you took part in the recovery of 6 people who were lost there. Any indication as to other dead that have been recovered, as to how many have been found in the last several hours?
At the last body that I had carried to the morgue area, which was a semi-trailer, was approximately 20-some-odd bodies in there at that time, and that was at 10 p.m.
And what is the mood among the workers there as to the prospects of finding more?
Very high. Everyone has the hopes of finding yet another survivor. They're digging deep and they're digging hard, looking, but again, it's being done by hand. The iron workers that are working in there are working to remove the steel, of which is on top of a lot of the bodies. Sifting through the debris, a lot of the body parts and the debris are one and the same. It's just becoming, right now, at this point, foul. The smell is starting to come from the dead. So the bodies The bodies are a little bit easier to identify at this point, although it's going to be a long, long process, months.
Kevin, are you going to go back in there again?
I'll be back in there tomorrow. I will be back in there as long as they need help. I'll be back in there.
Kevin McGarry on the scene. Thank you very much for sharing what you've been through and your colleagues down there and the rescue teams have been through. Let's go down to Lower Manhattan, near that site that Kevin was talking about, to CNN's Alessandro Vinci. Alessandro, what are you seeing from your perspective right now?
Well, Gary, seems incredible, but yet there are many incredible things about this story. More than 40 hours after those two hijacked planes hit the World Trade Center, the two towers, and then they collapsed. There are still smoke coming out of the debris of those two collapsing towers, a high billowing big cloud of white smoke billowing on top of those rubbles, and an indication how difficult. We heard one of the volunteers there telling us how difficult the operation is going on down there. The fact that still the debris, the iron and the metals are still smoldering, certainly making that effort even more difficult. We spent some time earlier on the ground there where hundreds of rescue workers, some of the paramedics and the police officers are all involved in that rescue operation. We saw a couple of refrigerator trucks there, probably trying to take some of the body parts, some of the bodies that have been recovered back to the morgue, and of course also a long line of dumpster trucks bringing out some of the rubble that has been put on those dumpster trucks to make some room for more trucks to come in. We understand so far more than 3,000 tons of rubble has been removed from the site. Earlier on, the New York Mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, said that 82 bodies had already been recovered. That number perhaps a bit higher now, since the recovery operation is still ongoing. There are 16 identified bodies. Of those 82, 16 have been identified, as we heard, many body parts. That number of casualties will be rising probably as the rescue operation will continue. Mayor Giuliani requested to the Federal Emergency Management Agency 6,000 body bags. Meanwhile, the entire area south of 14th Street in Lower Manhattan remains sealed off. Several blocks of Lower Manhattan remain also without electricity. That is why many of the people living, especially the elderly people living in the buildings here, have been evacuated. Some of the people decided to live on their own. But we also met several local Lower Manhattans, if you want. People who live here all their life. They said, we're not going to leave on a day like this. Back to you, Gary.
Thank you very much. Alessio Vinci there on the scene. We'll be coming back to you through the early morning hours here in the East Coast for your update reports. One little footnote as to an incident which occurred just a few minutes ago before we went to Alessio. There was a strange and unfamiliar sound in the skies over Manhattan. Obviously, for a couple of days now, there have been no signs of airplanes because the airports have been closed down, and Manhattan is an approachway to LaGuardia Airport. But about 3 a.m., or 3:05 a.m., we suddenly heard the sound of a fighter plane, and then a second fighter plane roaring over the heart of Manhattan here in New York City. What were two fighter planes doing, roaring with their afterburners on it, appeared to our ears, waking people out of their sleep? No idea, but that's what they were doing. Strange things happen in Manhattan in the middle of the night. Back to you now in Atlanta.
Garrick, thank you.
Investigators have spread up and down the East Coast in an exhaustive effort to identify those responsible for Tuesday's attacks. Mike Betcher reports now on the leads and what they reveal about the attacks.
From Maine to Florida, the investigation moved quickly along the eastern seaboard.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims, and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down.
Federal investigators now believe they know the identity of 4 men capable of piloting the 2 planes that left Boston and crashed into the World Trade Center. The key, rental cars parked by the suspected terrorist at Portland International Airport and Boston's Logan Airport, each yielding clues that ultimately led investigators to flight schools in Florida.
A number of the suspected hijackers were trained as pilots in the United States.
Rental records for the car left in Portland brought investigators to residences in Vero Beach, Florida, which were searched by the FBI. Inside one house, pictures of Adnan Bukhari and a pilot certificate from a Florida flight school in his name. Also found inside the residence, another pilot certificate for Amir Abbas Bukhari. Another certificate indicates that at least one of the Bukharis participated in a program to help train Saudi Airlines employees. Federal investigators believe the two men are brothers and prime suspects. FBI agents also visited other Florida locations after gathering clues from the second rental car parked at Boston's Logan Airport that led to the identity of two more men, also pilots, Mohammed Atta and Marwan Youssef Al-Shehi, who received at least some flight training at Huffman Aviation in Venice, Florida. Charles Voss is a bookkeeper at Huffman Aviation who briefly allowed the two men to stay at his house.
They were, like I said, students, and they arrived over there a year ago. It was in last July. And when they first arrived, they had no place to stay. They just popped in pretty much, as I recall, unannounced. And so we provided them, for the benefit of the flight school, provided them a place to stay for a few days.
At least one person believed to be an acquaintance of the Bukharis has been taken into custody for questioning.
There have been occasions where we have interviewed individuals and come to find that the individual is out of status and that individual has been detained on an immigration hold. But there have been no arrests relating to these hijackings at this point.
Having found the four men, federal investigators believe piloted the two hijacked jets into the World Trade Center towers. They are now scouring Florida flight schools, searching for the pilots of the other two jetliners, one that crashed in Pennsylvania, the other that rammed the Pentagon. Mike Betcher, CNN, Atlanta.
We have a dramatic glimpse into some of the terror during the hijacking of one flight. CNN has obtained a partial copy of cockpit transcripts as heard by air traffic controllers. Here's Justice Department correspondent Kelly Arena.
Sometime before United Airlines Flight 93 went down in Pennsylvania, a microphone in the cockpit was left open. Air traffic controllers heard shouting, someone yelling, "Get out of here!" The microphone is momentarily turned off. It comes back on. Scuffling is heard, and again, a voice yells, "Get out of here!" The microphone is again turned off. When it's turned on again, it is clear the pilot is no longer in the cockpit. Someone is heard speaking in broken English, in what was described as an Arabic accent, telling passengers, quote, "There is a bomb on board. This is the captain speaking. Remain in your seat. There is a bomb on board. Stay quiet. We are meeting their demands. We are returning to the airport." While this was going on in the cockpit, we have information about what was happening in the cabin. One passenger, 31-year-old Jeremy Glick, was flying with his 2-month-old child. He called home from the doomed plane. He said the passengers were herded to the rear of the plane by a trio of hijackers, armed with knives and a red box they say contained a bomb. When Glick's family confirmed for him what another passenger heard, that a plane had already struck the World Trade Center, Glick dropped the phone, then returned to tell his family the male passengers had taken a vote to attack the hijackers. Glick wasn't heard from again. The plane held 38 passengers and a crew of 8. Kelly Arena, CNN, Washington.
Among the businesses in the World Trade Center's Twin Towers, there were 31 countries represented, and one of them, Britain, is expecting the number of its casualties to keep rising. The word we have now from British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw is that the number of dead is approaching 100. Earlier, a spokesman for British Prime Minister Tony Blair said it could go into the hundreds. The Prime Minister has recalled Parliament from its summer recess.
President Bush has vowed to punish those responsible and says America will be victorious in what he calls a battle of good versus evil, and he's getting backing at home and abroad. Both houses of Congress have approved unanimously a resolution vowing retaliation against those found responsible. Our senior White House correspondent John King reports.
The president got his first look at the devastation as planning for a possible military response intensified. The White House is asking Congress to pass a resolution authorizing the use of force to retaliate for the deadly terrorist attacks and making a major diplomatic push seeking international support as well. Mr. Bush called the leaders of Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Russia, and China and welcomed a NATO statement calling the attacks on the United States tantamount to a strike against the alliance.
We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win.
Mr. Bush met twice with his national security team, and sources tell CNN the discussions included talk of potential military responses and an update on the fast-developing investigation. In the words of one senior official familiar with the evidence, quote, everything points to the terrorist network of Osama bin Laden.
This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever.
The Bush team also responded to questions about why it took the president so long to return to Washington after the attacks. The administration said it had credible and reliable information that the jet that barreled into the Pentagon was initially heading toward the White House. And it said there was reason to believe Air Force One also was a target. And that is why Mr. Bush stopped at 2 military bases on a 9-hour trip back to Washington from Florida and had fighter jet escorts on the final leg home.
The information that we had was real and credible about Air Force One. The manner in which Air Force One operated maintained the security of Air Force One at all times.
The president met with congressional leaders seeking quick agreement on an emergency spending bill. And officials report progress in both sets of talks. One aimed at authorizing $20 billion for the recovery and early investigative efforts, the other backing the use of force to retaliate for terrorist strikes Mr. Bush equates to acts of war. John King, CNN, the White House.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld apparently is trying to get U.S. forces ready for combat. In a taped message to America's soldiers, the defense chief said that much more will be expected of them in weeks and months to come. Mark Potter joins us now from the Pentagon with the latest there. Mark?
Well, good morning, Jonathan. There are a lot of activities on the part of the U.S. military right now, and some of them are being witnessed by the citizens of this country. There are a number of aspects that we can actually see with our own eyes. U.S. officials have dispatched a number of aircraft carriers and ships along the and warships along the east and west coast of this country, where they are in what is being described as a defensive posture. Now, on the East Coast, from the U.S. Atlantic Fleet in Norfolk, there are 2 carriers and 5 warships in place. According to the Navy, they are there to contribute to the air defense of Washington, D.C. and New York City. The carriers are the John F. Kennedy and the George Washington. Also activated, we just received this news, the USNS Comfort, a hospital ship based in Baltimore. It is sailing for New York and is expected to arrive there Friday. On the West Coast, another carrier, the USS John C. Stennis, deployed from San Diego. It and 14 other ships are patrolling along the West Coast and along Hawaii. Now, something that people may not be aware of right now, the U.S. military is in control of all airspace over the United States. Civilian planes are grounded, domestic and international planes grounded right now. The only planes in the sky belong to the U.S. military. And so citizens in a number of cities, including here in Washington and certainly in New York, have been seeing fighter jets flying overhead on combat air patrol. We are told that control is expected to return to the civilian agency, the Federal Aviation Administration, sometime later today. Now, here in Washington and New York, again, citizens have also watched the deployment of the National Guard. In this city, the capital city, we can see trucks along the roads. We can see Humvees parked at intersections, National Guard personnel standing watch on street corners. That's not something that the people here are used to seeing. This is unusual. And in New York City also, the National Guard is involved in the search and the rescue effort. Now, across the globe in the Persian Gulf area, there are 2 carrier battle groups in place right now. The USS Carl Vinson arrived on scene to replace the USS Enterprise group. But before the Enterprise could get and its group could get very far along, they only made it to the Arabian Sea. They were ordered to stop and to stay in position. So now both groups are in the general area. With those two groups there are some 30 warships in place supporting those two carriers, also about 150 aircraft. So a lot of activity on the part of the U.S. military, some far away, some close enough for citizens of this country to see. Back to you.
Mark Potter at the Pentagon. Thanks very much. Ralitza.
Pressure is mounting on the Taliban government of Afghanistan, which the United States has accused of sheltering Osama bin Laden. Nick Robertson joins us now via video phone from Kabul with the latest on the Afghan angle on this story. Nick.
For relief for this morning, 3 United Nations planes took off from Kabul airport bound for Pakistan. On board were 3 international diplomats, one from the United States, one from Australia, and one from Germany. They've been here helping, trying to secure the release of 8 international aid workers here on charges of trying to convert Muslims here to Christianity. They have left. Along with them, the last of all the international United Nations staff here. There were 80 in country in total. They are also gone. Along with them as well, many foreign overseas journalists who were working here. They also have gone. The International Committee for the Red Cross has begun pulling out its 30 international staff who are in this country. A reduction of all international and overseas staff by independent, non-governmental aid groups is also underway and expected to be completed later today. On the streets of Kabul, there is a growing apprehension and fear about what could be coming next. People here have been listening to the radio, the Taliban radio here, and on that radio station there have been reports about what's been going on in the United States. People on the streets here also, like their government, condemning the terrorism, offering their sympathies, but very concerned about the possibility that they could be involved in retribution attacks on Afghanistan. Taliban leadership late last night issuing further statements. Spokesman Abdul Hai Mutmain from the spiritual leadership base in Kandahar in southern Afghanistan, appealing to the United States, saying that Afghans were poor, saying that any attacks on the country would not help Afghans and Afghanistan, saying that the cost of any single missile was greater than the cost of any single building in Afghanistan. Also saying that killing the Taliban leadership was not a worthwhile thing. And again, distancing Osama bin Laden from the center of international suspicion for these attacks, saying that Osama bin Laden himself could not have been responsible. So clearly apprehension within the leadership of the Taliban. Very significantly here in Kabul as well, the population and the Taliban leadership concerned that any attacks on Kabul could help open the doorway to the Northern Alliance. That is the group that the Taliban have been fighting against to gain control of the country. The Northern Alliance controls about 5% of the territory in the northeast part of Afghanistan. There is a front line 30 miles north of the city Kabul. It's been static for the last 5 years, more or less. There was heavy fighting. We could hear heavy fighting on that front line last night. Taliban jet fighters were taking off, heading in that direction. The fear amongst some of the population here and amongst the Taliban leadership is that should there be a sustained attack on the Kabul area, that could help push forward an advance by their opposition to retake Kabul. These are all concerns right now in the forefront of the minds, not only of the people here, but also the leadership. Ralitza.
Nick, thank you.
Pakistan is the main supporter of the Taliban. And while Osama bin Laden has not officially been termed a suspect in the attacks, Washington is expecting help from Pakistan in the investigation.
We have not made a determination yet as to who is responsible for yesterday's attack. But we thought, as we gather information and as we look at possible sources of the attack, it would be useful to point out to the Pakistani leadership at every level that we are looking for and expecting their fullest cooperation and their help and support as we conduct this investigation and as we generate more information.
In a statement issued Thursday, Pakistan pledged full cooperation with the United States.
While the world's attention was focused on the U.S., Israeli tanks and bulldozers rolled into the West Bank for a second straight day. The Israeli military says it attacked several Palestinian outposts in the West Bank in an effort to disrupt terror activity in the area. Witnesses say residents of Jenin exchanged fire with Israeli troops who destroyed a police compound they first attacked Tuesday. Palestinian officials say the attacks were unprovoked and accuse Israel of using the U.S. tragedy to divert attention from their attacks on Palestinians.
Saudi Arabia joined several other Arab states in expressing sympathy for the U.S. This as investigators disclosed that at least 2 of the men suspected in the attacks were Saudi nationals.
If this case is proven beyond doubt that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Arab people, the Muslim people will help to expose the identities of the perpetrators of this crime. Lately, the media mentioned Osama bin Laden as a Saudi citizen. We in the kingdom, the government and the people of Saudi Arabia refuse to have any person affiliated with terrorism to be connected to our country.
U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft calls the probe into Tuesday's attacks the most massive and intensive investigation in American history. And as David Ensor reports, U.S. officials apparently have already made some significant progress.
U.S. officials say on the passenger manifests of the hijacked planes used in the attacks, they found names associated with terrorist groups. Intelligence officials say the evidence still points to the al-Qaeda group, headed by Osama bin Laden.
There had to be some brains behind this. We have some good, promising leads. They're obviously being followed.
Publicly, the Bush administration is accusing no one so far, while warning nations they too will pay for any help given to those who attacked New York and Washington.
We will hold accountable those countries that provide support, that give host nation, if you can call it that, support and facilities to these kinds of terrorist groups.
Afghanistan's Taliban government has long offered haven to bin Laden, but U.S. officials say they have no evidence thus far of any state directly assisting the attacks in New York and Washington. Many analysts argue that such a coordinated broadside could not have been possible without it.
Osama bin Laden represents a complete terrorist network. He will have one or more state sponsors, countries that he's either based in or working in collusion with. There'll have been passport support, communication support.
One thing I think that ought to make us a bit suspicious about whether bin Laden was involved in it alone or not is that he goes to great lengths to advertise himself. And when you see something like that, you begin to wonder whether or not there may be an effort to draw our attention solely to him, to the neglect of someone who may be his principal contractor.
If there was state support, a number of terrorism experts point to Iraq as the most likely suspect. A statement from President Saddam Hussein on Iraqi television said, quote, "The United States reaps the thorns that its rulers have sown in the world."
U.S. officials say they are developing good law enforcement and intelligence leads. They do not know yet who was behind these attacks, nor whether any state assisted them. But they believe they soon will. David Ensor, CNN, Washington.
Experts say the magnitude of Tuesday's attack suggests that the action was organized by a highly sophisticated group or groups of terrorists intent on generating chaos and fear, as much damage and loss of life as possible. And it represents a massive breach of U.S. national security. Joining us from our London studios, Paul Slaughter, Chief Executive Officer of the international security firm Task International. Mr. Slaughter, thank you very much for joining us. What do you think?
Pleasure.
What do you think of the security measures that we're hearing now that the FAA is planning to introduce at U.S. airports?
I think it's probably long awaited. The big problem with security matters is that anyone who wants to perpetrate these type of crimes, they've always got the advantage of time. And they know when they're going to do it, where they're going to do it. All security matters are breachable. You can either go round, over, through, under. You cannot have a complete 100% guaranteed security measures in place. The big problem is that the perpetrators of crimes such as this, as I said, know when they're going to do it. And no security matters can fully protect establishments, airlines, buildings, or anything like that.
So what can protect them better?
Obviously, increased security matters, and you just have to try and make places like that a harder target to attack. With the advent of X-ray machines, perhaps body searching, greater vetting of passengers, but of course this imposes on travel, civil liberties, things like that. It has to be a balancing act. But unfortunately, as has quite often been said, and the IRA have been quoted, they only have to be lucky once. And unfortunately, when they are as lucky as this, you're going to have the body toll that we've seen and will see in future days to come.
Mr. Slaughter, what about the cockpit, making it very difficult to breach the cockpit door and get inside and hijack a plane?
That's one measure, but of course you have to take into account the human factor. And obviously when the terrorists got on board and probably started attacking the stewardesses or passengers with the knives they had on board, it takes a very determined, logical flight crew not to open the door when they're hearing screaming, pandemonium, panicking within the cabin itself. And for the pilot or co-pilot or engineer not to open the door to try and find out what's happening is a very, very difficult thing to do. I don't believe you can criticize them for trying to find out what's happening behind them. Perhaps we need to have cameras installed on aircraft so the pilot can see what's going on behind him. But of course all these measures take financing, and probably you're going to have maybe acts of government to ensure that these take place.
What do you think was the biggest mistake that was made by U.S. officials in this case?
I think that's very difficult to say. It's the big problem is that you have to balance security measures with civil liberties and also with people traveling all over the world. If you have a complete security package, excuse me, you're not going to have people traveling because they won't want to. Obviously, allowing these people onto the aircraft with whatever weapons they had, and all we've heard is that they had knives. Well, you can do as much damage with a 3-inch blade as you can with a 6-9-inch blade. And it's quite easy to get those on board aircraft. I mean, knives now can be secreted in belt buckles, in pens that work, and all they have to do is to grab hold of a stewardess or a passenger, stab them in the right place, and you're going to have copious quantities of blood all over the place, which instills panic in people.
Mrs. Slaughter, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thousands are feared dead. The United States and its NATO allies are preparing to respond, and families have been torn apart, perhaps irreparably. But beyond the devastating human toll, there could be another impact from all of this, specifically on the global economy and the markets. Richard Quest joins us now from London, where he's been watching business unfold. Richard?
Many thanks, Jonathan. Officials at the European Central Bank will meet in Frankfurt later this Thursday. They'll be deciding what more they can do to limit the global economic impact of the attack on the World Trade Center. There have been calls for European countries to cut interest rates to help stabilize the global economy, to bring an air of stability in this uncertain time. But many analysts do not expect the ECB to cut its short-term interest rates when they do have that meeting. Let's take a look at the latest currency rates that we're seeing around the globe. You'll see now that the US dollar has gained back some strength at 119 Japanese yen. Against the euro, it's just at 90 US cents to the new single currency. The new European trading day is underway. Let's catch up with how trading is going and what stocks may be of interest. Liz George is at the London Stock Exchange. Liz?
Richard, thanks very much indeed. Notwithstanding the feelings here very much of shock and distress at what's happened in New York, there is a feeling of wanting to conduct business as usual and really getting on with trading. Although, of course, volumes are very, very light and trading is extremely muted. Now, we saw a very volatile day on the markets yesterday. I was talking to Jeremy Stretch of the Bank of Canada earlier on, and he was saying people really didn't have any idea where to price things. And that's why we were seeing such huge leaps around in the markets and such enormous volatility. And really today, is likely to be very much more of the same. The markets are open, and this is where they've opened at, all of them trading slightly lower today. Towards the end of the day yesterday, we began to recover some of those dramatic losses, but now they're beginning to fall off again. Everyone really now looking towards the US, hoping that the US will open and also give some direction, but of course being very aware that once the US does open for trade on the equity markets, there may be some dramatic reaction there, a big sell-off going on there until things come out, and people saying really it's going to be about 4 weeks before we begin to see any calms return. Let me just show you one or two individual stocks. Of course, it was the consumer cyclicals which saw a very big sell-off. Companies like British Airways. British Airways losing around about $9 million a day from its planes being grounded. It's down 7.21%. The insurers, of course, which have risk over in the US, saw a very big sell-off yesterday. Today, they're beginning to come back a little bit. Allianz, Europe's largest insurer, up 1.65% in the early market. And LVMH, the consumer luxury goods company, also selling off today, worrying about what impact this is going to have on the US consumer. Richard.
Liz George at the London Stock Exchange. Gold and oil have been much in the news. Let's catch up with how those have traded, starting with gold, where the price is now at around $278 an ounce. It's reversed some of the gains that were seen in the initial panic after the attack. Now markets starting to calm down somewhat, and Brent crude at around $28 an ounce. Again, prices starting to come back as people realise that supply will be maintained. Over now to Maggie Lake in New York to bring us up to date with events on financial markets and what we can look forward to there. Maggie?
Richard, of course, the stock markets will not be trading today. That gives us all time to contemplate the events. And of course, the task of picking up the pieces now lies ahead. Companies are grappling with how they will cope in the wake of the attack. Among the hardest hit will be the airline industry. For the first time in history, all commercial air travel in the United States was suspended Tuesday. Airports were again closed Wednesday, and service will be limited at best later today, which is, of course, Thursday morning. The effect of the disruption is staggering. The airline industry generates about $90 to $100 billion in revenues. About 4,000 planes fly a day domestically. While flights are grounded, the losses work out to about $250 million a day. Experts say even when airports reopen, security measures are likely to mean it is many months before air travel is back up to speed. Because of that, analysts say the industry very well may exceed the $2 billion loss suffered the year of the Gulf War. Now, we've already seen Midway Airlines, which has been struggling financially, say they have suspended all operations and have laid off 1,700 people immediately. And it is not just U.S. airlines. Asian carriers are seeing their losses mount as more and more flights to the U.S. are canceled. Europe certainly will be affected as well. And it's not just airlines. The entertainment, hotel, and restaurant industries are all considered vulnerable. As we will see, this event will be felt for months to come. Jonathan, back to you.
Maggie, thanks very much. The markets, the air travel system in the United States, and above all, the victims. We want to remind you that for more information on the attacks and the aftermath, please consult our internet site. We have complete information, including the latest reports from the United States and around the world, photo galleries, video and maps, and you'll find it at cnn.com.
The disruption caused by the attacks has affected a number of events. The United Nations has postponed a World Children's Summit in New York City next week. A question mark hangs over the scheduled World Bank IMF meeting in Washington. And Sweden has canceled a weekend summit of 14 heads of state. Sports have also been affected. Major League Baseball games were canceled Wednesday and will be Thursday as well. While in Europe, UEFA Cup football matches were called off as a sign of respect. Doubts also hang over the Ryder Cup, which is scheduled to get underway in England at the end of the month. Several golfers advocate that the event be postponed. And for the most part, the U.S. government was open for business Wednesday. As Brooks Jackson tells us, for many government agencies, it was hardly business as usual.
The mail was moving on the day after, but more slowly. Planes were still grounded. The Postal Service scrambled to ship more mail by truck and train. It was like that throughout the federal government, which was struggling back to normal after being all but shut down Tuesday by the terrorist attacks.
The prayer will be offered today by our chapel.
The House reconvened a day after the Capitol had been evacuated.
We mourn our dead and reach out with prayer and acts of compassion
To all those families splattered with blood.
The Senate reconvened also.
Senate will be in order.
But little business was done. The day was devoted mainly to denouncing terrorism. Several committee hearings were canceled. Outside Washington, the humdrum business of government ground on. Social Security offices were open, mostly, although 43 in and around New York City were closed for the day. Federal storm trackers kept tab on Hurricane Erin in the Atlantic and Tropical Storm Felix, neither a threat to U.S. shores. Agriculture Department officials continue to monitor western wildfires. 2 new fires, 2 old ones contained. A light day. Good thing because 2 teams were sent to deal with the unnatural flames in New York and Washington. In Washington, where federal workers had been sent home the day before, about half showed up for work at the Department of Transportation, a typical agency. Many parents stayed home because schools were still closed. In the midst of all this, the Postal Service announced it would seek a 3-cent increase in the price of a first-class postage stamp. Big news in normal times, which these are not. Brooks Jackson, CNN, Washington.
The International Space Station's 3-man crew caught a frightening view of the destruction. Smoke from the World Trade Center clearly visible from the space station more than 200 miles in orbit. As the station passed over North America, the crew commander used a camcorder to film the aftermath.
We could see New York City and the smoke from the fires. Our prayers and thoughts go out to all the people there, and just wanted the folks in New York to know that their city still looks very beautiful from space. I know it's very difficult for everybody in America right now.
In New York City itself, the damage was, of course, much closer at hand. People are still at work through the night trying to find the people and help them if they can affected. We return now to New York City and CNN's Garrick Utley. Garrick?
Jonathan, of course, the work is continuing here, but there's something that we've been hearing in our reports this evening, early morning hours, East Coast time, and in fact we've heard it really since the attacks on Tuesday morning. That is a new sense of fear, of anxiety, of vulnerability about Americans, not just around the Pentagon or here in New York, but indeed across the country. And what does that really lead to? How are Americans going to respond to this? Well, if we look back at the 20th century, not long gone, generations were formed by World War II and World War I before that, by the Korean War, by Vietnam, by the whole atmosphere of the long Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation. Well, fortunately, that's gone now. It's now the 21st century, but there's a new kind of enemy. We may not know who or where that enemy is, but it's out there, or maybe it is within. Here's some thoughts about that.
The parallel has been drawn between these sneak attacks in 2001 and the one on Pearl Harbor in 1941, and how both were
a date which will live in infamy.
Except that 60 years ago, President Roosevelt and the nation knew who the enemy was. And since the enemy in Asia and Europe in World War II wasn't hiding, the full weight of American power could be mobilized to achieve victory. Half a century later, the United States could do it again against an enemy who couldn't hide. But now the face of the enemy is invisible, if not as terror and destruction. And we discover the advantage an enemy has who can choose the time, place, and weapons of war. That is what happened in Vietnam, where superior American military strength was inferior to the tactics of a largely invisible enemy and its willingness to take casualties. And the enemy is not always found in war. One of the greatest tests to face Americans was the Great Depression. Americans were fearful about their future in 1933 when Franklin Roosevelt warned that the invisible enemy was within.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed effort to convert retreat into advance.
And advancing is where we are right now in the United States, not just in the rescue efforts or the investigation to find out who was responsible, but also in recognizing that the very fear of terrorism can become the enemy.
And perhaps it's not really that surprising that facing the devil we know is easier, as the old proverb goes, than facing the one we don't know, who today appears to be a terrorist. Jonathan?
Garrick Utley, thanks very much. Relita?
Commercial air travel has resumed in the United States, but only on a very limited basis. Authorities decided to clear some flights so stranded passengers would be allowed to return home. But Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta says the general ground stop should continue until airports are able to implement new security measures. Officials want to implement a total ban on knives, including plastic ones. Only butter knives will be allowed for in-flight meals. There will be no more curbside check-in or check-ins at sites away from the airport. Only ticketed passengers will be allowed past airport metal detectors. The government wants to set higher standards for airport security personnel and put more federal air marshals on duty at large airports.
Another aspect to all of this, the rescue and assistance effort. Medical officials say massive voluntary donations have provided enough blood for the victims of the attacks, but blood can only be stored for 42 days and more may be needed in 2 to 8 weeks' time. If you're willing to donate blood, please contact the Red Cross, the number 1-800-HELP-NOW.
Images of horror, of devastation, of grief are affecting people around the world.
And for Americans living abroad, it has been especially hard. Jim Bitterman reports.
4,000 miles and an ocean away, worshippers in these distant pews were in no less shock than if they had been looking on from the streets of Lower Manhattan. In this globalized world with its globalized terror, you can be an American in Paris and be just as grief-stricken. Churchmen knew people came to grieve together and used the moment to warn against letting the wrong emotions carry the day.
Yes, we need to go find these people, and we need to deal with them with justice, not out of mindless vengeance and hatred to repay them, but because we, Americans, we don't live like that.
In the end, it was more than just the shared empathy Americans do. Those whose lives led them to Paris are often exactly the sort of people who know New York, who know Washington, and fear for friends left behind. Expatriated, but still patriots, some of whom believe their homeland has been too disengaged from world affairs.
I really hope that it brings us out of isolation. You cannot make peace worldwide. You cannot have peoples living together if they don't communicate. And the only way to do that is to come out of isolation and work together.
The priest at the Episcopal Cathedral here remembered the words of Douglas MacArthur at the end of World War II. If we will not devise a more equitable system than war, the general said, Armageddon will be at our doors. But the words that echoed longest after the prayer service was over were the ones that came at the very end. Words most in the church had learned from childhood, but in a now and forever less innocent world, words whose meaning will never be quite the same. Jim Bitterman, CNN, Paris.
We leave you this hour with some of the images, the words,
the sadness and grief from people around the world.
I can only say that all those who have lost their lives, and indeed those who are related and have loved ones who've lost their lives, are very much in my thoughts and prayers.
I react to the families hearing the news, how their lives are never going to be the same. And I feel their pain. I saw that building collapse and I broke down in tears. I was just sobbing because this is pain. This is human suffering.
We are here to lay some wreaths, some flowers, and to also show our sympathy in action so that the American people understand the Palestinians are not their enemy.
On behalf of the citizens of Belfast, I would like to extend our deepest condolences to the people of the United States of America following the terrible atrocity.
This is the House side. The camera quickly panned over to the other side of the Capitol. There aren't that many people coming. Well, now we see a few more coming out. Dana, what about security measures at the Capitol? How much have they been stepped up since Tuesday morning?
They have been stepped up quite a bit. Certainly on Wednesday, there was a wider perimeter around the Capitol. Instead of checking our IDs and our parking passes right at the gates of the Capitol, or at least right at the entrance to the Capitol parking, it was about a 2 or 3 block perimeter around the Capitol that they were checking IDs. Today it was a little bit more kind of business as usual. They just checked all of our IDs as we were coming into the Capitol, but there has been certainly a more visible presence of security, and there haven't been any regular Capitol tours around today.
All right, so Dana Bash reporting the Senate side, and now we're looking at the House side of the United States Capitol being evidently being evacuated as well. Our correspondent, congressional correspondent Jonathan Karl is on the phone now with us. Jonathan, what have you learned?
Well, I'm standing literally about 10 feet away from Senator Daschle, the Senate leader, who is conferring with John McCain and John Kerry and Patrick Leahy. Many senators have come out here, asked Daschle what is going on. I tell you, they look extremely calm because what they believe is this was a suspicious package that was found. And Daschle told one of the other senators that the dogs, meaning the bomb-sniffing dogs, reacted negatively. In other words, that it did not contain a bomb. But one of the Capitol Hill police came over to Daschle a while ago and said this would take about 15 minutes to clear and to make sure the situation is under control. But a state of real calm out here behind the Capitol. You know, senators conferring, waiting to be able to go back in. Much different from what it was just 5 or 6 minutes ago when everybody was running out, being told by the police that they had to immediately evacuate.
Well, we certainly don't want to minimize any threat in this atmosphere that we're in after Tuesday morning. Everything has to be taken seriously. But having said that, yesterday, there have been a series of hoaxes, threats. A number of places have been evacuated. As I said, American University here in Washington completely evacuated earlier today. Kate Snow, you're joining us now on the telephone. Tell us where you are, congressional correspondent.
Yeah, Judy, I'm actually next to the camera, the shot that you're looking at. I'm actually standing right next to that camera. These are members of the House that you see coming down the steps. We don't have a great shot here, but the House of Representatives, they have all been inside receiving an intelligence briefing. I also see pages, a lot of pages. These are young people who work in the Congress coming down the steps. Now, the Senate had been evacuated first, we understand, and based on John Karl's reporting, that was because of some sort of suspicious package. All this is very preliminary. The House had not been evacuated, but based on what I'm seeing right now, it looks like they are now evacuating the House of Representatives. Judy, very little information about why. All I can tell you is that people are very much on edge here, as they are in many parts of the country right now. And when someone says the word evacuation, I think that's why you see some people moving rather quickly.
That's
Judy?
right. They take it seriously. And as we're sitting here, you have to think what is going on in the minds and the operations of these security people, because if they are receiving a number of threats, which one has to assume they are all the time, they've got to be able to distinguish between what's real and what isn't. And we heard John Karl saying, Senator Daschle, the Senate Democratic leader, the Senate Majority Leader, saying suspicious package found. The dogs didn't react in a way that would give them cause for concern, but they went ahead and acted on that anyway. Now, we don't know if there's some other development that has caused the security folks to have the Capitol evacuated. But as you can see, it is proceeding. People are pouring out of the House side. Kate Snow telling us these are members of Congress and others who work in the staff. And right now we see security vehicles pulling up. This looks like at least a part of a motorcade. People running to jump in. I can only guess who is in there or nearby. But again, more members of Congress and others who work at the Capitol coming down these stairs. this is just, you know, as no one who's watching is surprised to know, this is just a very tense time, not just in Washington and New York and in many other of our important large cities around the country, where people who work in government, people who work in finance, as New York is seen, have reason, every reason now to wonder whether the next threat that comes along is a real one.
Judy,
Kate?
Yeah, let me tell you a couple of things, Judy. I just was talking to members as they're walking by here. I'm told that there's a suspicious package verifying what John Carl had reported. I'm also told by our producer, Ted Barrett, that he's just spoken with the spokesperson for the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, who says indeed there was a suspicious package and that, in his words, a dog got a hit on it. In other words, a dog found it to be suspicious. This is all very preliminary, Judy, but that's what we're hearing as of right this moment, that there was a suspicious package, and that's why they're evacuating the members of the House.
Yeah, these are the kinds of situations where we can only piece information together. We're not able to talk directly with the people in charge of security. We're basing this on, well, in some instances, we think secondhand information. John Carl had talked with Senator Daschle. You've been talking with an aide to House Speaker Dennis Hastert. I don't know if John Carl, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. I'm actually, yes, go ahead, Judy.
No, go ahead. I just want to ask you what the reaction is. What are people saying as they stand around there and wait?
I'm standing next to Senator McCain. Would you like to ask him directly?
Sure.
He's right here is one of those had to evacuate. Here he is.
Hello, Judy.
Hello, Senator John McCain.
I haven't seen all the senators this close together in many years.
Are people taking this seriously?
Oh, I'm sure that they're taking it seriously. Otherwise, they wouldn't have told us to come out here on the lawn.
Is this the first evacuation order since Tuesday morning at the Capitol?
As far as I know, when I've been here, it's the first evacuation since Tuesday morning. Yes. My understanding is that, and this is third hand, is that there was a suspicious package in the Capitol. Is what I heard, but I'm not sure positive that's true.
Senator McCain, you've been around a long time. You've worked obviously in the military. You know how some of these security operations work. How do the security people go about distinguishing between what's a real threat and what's a hoax?
I don't know, except that in the case of if it's just a phone call, it has to have some kind of corroboration. Again, this is third hand, and I hesitate to repeat it, but I was told that the dogs reacted negatively to this package, was the reason why they gave it some credibility. So, but I want to tell you that I heard that third hand, and I'm sure that if I gave you an inaccurate depiction of the situation, that it'll be cleared up within an hour or so.
But Senator, isn't it your sense that the security has been beefed up there at the Capitol since the incidents of Tuesday?
Oh, absolutely. The security has been beefed up, and I think it's very appropriate that that be the case.
All right, Senator John McCain.
All right, I'm going to give you back to your crack correspondent here, okay?
All right, Senator John McCain answering some questions for us, borrowing the telephone of our correspondent, Jonathan Carl. Jeff Greenfield, who is our CNN senior analyst in New York City, is with us now. Jeff?
Judy, this is one of the costs of what happened Tuesday, and it's one of the costs that is going to roll through this country for an indeterminate number of times. The purpose of terrorism is to terrorize, is to make us insecure. What we've seen the last 2 days is the secondary fallout from the horror that's a couple of miles over my shoulder. We've had the Empire State Building evacuated. We've had Penn Station evacuated. There's every reason to think that malicious or stupid or deranged people will be calling in threats on everything from airlines to trains to public buildings. You remember Inauguration Day, how upset some of us were that people going onto the mall to hear the speech of the new president were screened for the first time in American history, I believe. And one of the things that is going on is that the attack on the World Trade Center has ruffled through the entire country and made insecurity a way of life. And we don't know how long this is going to go on.
That's right, Jeff. I mean, we have seen in the last few days untold numbers of buildings evacuated in Washington and in New York. I've been saying just today, I was told that at one point they were in New York, they were going to evacuate LaGuardia Airport. Now, I don't know if that was actually carried out.
And it's beyond that, Judy. You know, it's things like the waiter at a restaurant saying, my wife just called, they found a bomb in the Brooklyn Macy's. No, they didn't. But those are the kinds of stories that ripple through neighborhoods and ripple through communities and make everybody on edge. And it's one of the things, I believe, that terrorists try to do when they strike at targets like they did here in New York. I mean, give me one small example. The voting machines in New York are all in every school and apartment building. They're shuttered. That was supposed to happen on Tuesday. That's the way we decide things. But that's been postponed. You know, you can't use a credit card in a lot of shops and restaurants. And you got a tiny indication of the financial fallout. And we always look, of course, for understandable reasons, at the major, unimaginable horrors. Sometimes it's these little things that indicate just how deeply this act has struck.
No question about it. And Jeff, Capitol Police now confirming that both sides of the Capitol, if you will, both houses of the Capitol, both the Senate, which we first had word of from our producer Dana Bash, and then the House. It's simply two parts of one building. The Capitol, the dome you see there, the right side of it, if the camera's where I think it is, would be the House side, the left side, the Senate, the left being the north, and the other side the South. But you can only imagine what is going on in the minds of these security authorities as they try to figure out what's a real threat and what's one that we can just discard and not worry about.
That's exactly the point. It is that every crank phone call now has the credibility of the biggest horror that has ever been visited on the mainland of the United States behind it. And who can blame them for taking seriously what they would have dismissed or handled with a grain of salt 72 hours ago? This is one of the many prices we are going to be paying for what has happened here.
All right, now we want to go to our congressional correspondent, Kate Snow, who's talking with one of the Democratic leaders in the House. Kate.
Judy, this is the second-ranking Democrat in the House, David Bonyer, Democrat from Michigan, a man who's clearly very calm right now. Tell me what you know about what's happened here.
Well, we were on the House floor, and we're getting an intelligence briefing by the intelligence community, and the House floor was filled with members of the House, and I was told by a staff that there had been some evacuation in the Senate, and so I grabbed Bob Menendez, who was sitting next to me, and we rushed downstairs to see what was going on through the Sergeant-at-Arms office, and he came up the stairs at the same time mentioning that there was a package that was unidentified, and that they wanted to clear the Capitol. So people have come out of the Capitol and are on the grounds now, and they're checking it out.
And do you know where that package is or what kind of a package
I do not. I don't know any details other than that. I heard some rumors in the back here about the Hart Building as well.
That's one of the Senate
office buildings. It's just a block from here. But obviously they're not taking any chances, and they shouldn't.
When they evacuated you all on Tuesday, it was the first time in history that there had been a mandatory evacuation of this Capitol, and now this is the second time in history. Does that strike you? Do you think we're on a very trigger-sensitive time right now?
Well, people are sensitive, obviously, but they will not close this Capitol down. We are going right back into the Capitol. We're going to do the business of this country. And those who have perpetrated this crime against this nation are going to be dealt with justly, but severely and swiftly.
I noticed they did not take the Speaker of the House. I believe he's right over here to our right.
Yeah,
he's just down the way there. The Speaker was evacuated on Tuesday immediately as soon as they knew about the Pentagon incident. Does that tell us something that he's still standing here? Does that tell us that they don't take this as seriously?
Well, they've got a package that they're looking at. Basically, that's what this tells us, and I suspect that it'll be cleared, and we'll be back in there to finish our briefing soon.
Judy, I'll send it back to you.
Kate, it's sounding like the members of Congress we've been talking with, Senator McCain earlier, and John Karl saying he was talking to Senator Daschle and others, they seem to be taking this very much in stride, although as we watch it, as you point out, Kate, this is only the second time and it happens to be in the span of just a couple of days, that the United States Capitol has had to be evacuated because of a threat that they take seriously. Now, granted, we're in a much more sensitive time right now given what happened Tuesday, but
I can tell you, Judy, that the Capitol, I talked to the Capitol Police this morning about security here. Yesterday there was a perimeter that had been drawn around the Capitol, about 1 block to the east and the west and 2 blocks to the north and the south of this whole area. Now that has been changed, Judy. There is no longer that perimeter. They had moved it in this morning. When I came in at 6 o'clock this morning, they checked my car very carefully. They used mirrors to look underneath the cage of the car, which is something new. However, there was no perimeter any longer, so they had ramped down a little bit on security a little bit earlier today. That's what I can tell you, but that is more than they usually would do. Judy?
Kate, what are the restrictions? Who can actually come on the grounds of the Capitol and go into the building now? I mean, I know that tourists go in there, reporters go in. Who can get in and out?
I have my pass on me right now, but there is a press pass that I carry with me at all times that shows these guards that I'm legitimate and that I work here and that I can bring my car in. I also have a tag on my car. That's typical. All of the members have press identification. They have buttons that they wear. All the staff have identification. Those are the people that can come into the buildings. Now, normally, Judy, tourists can also come into this area. Normally, they can also go into the building. Today, that has not been exactly the case. I think they've been allowing tourists in escorted. They've not been doing tours of the Capitol. So it's been a little bit more secure than normal. On a normal day, if you're a tourist, you have to go through magnometers, you have to go through detectors to make sure you don't have any weapons. There's quite a bit of security here on a day-to-day basis. Right now, it's a little bit more than it normally would be, but less than it was 2 days ago. Judy?
All right, Kate Snow at the Capitol, where members of Congress evacuated, everyone else in the Capitol evacuated because of a threat, a suspicious package. At the White House, also increased security in the aftermath of Tuesday. Let's go there now, and our senior White House correspondent, John King. John?
Judy, increased security and what most Americans certainly will see as some dramatic steps, just in case, the White House is saying, but dramatic steps nonetheless. We have been told repeatedly in recent days about the increased security around the White House. We are now told that Vice President Dick Cheney was taken from the White House complex earlier today and ushered up to Camp David, the president's retreat in the mountains in Maryland, a very secure area. That, we are told, to get a good distance between the president and the vice president because of what sources describe as yet another threat on the White House grounds. We reported earlier today that they had extended the security perimeter, again, outside of the White House. Obviously, they have not evacuated the White House. We are still here, as is the President of the United States and his senior staff. But we are told, as a precaution, they decided they did not want the president and the vice president together on the White House grounds, so the vice president was moved up to Camp David. We are also told that there are plans for the president himself to go to Camp David this weekend, where the vice president will be as well. So the president and vice president will be together later. Judy, go ahead.
John, the question is, if there's a threat, why wouldn't they put the president at Camp David and leave the vice president at the White House if the threat is at the White House?
Well, Judy, they don't want to answer all of our questions about this, obviously, because of the security measures involved and the fact that we are all still here, that they have not evacuated the president, not evacuated the senior staff, would obviously lead us to believe that they do not view this as an immediate and perhaps not as an overly credible threat, should I say. But just as you see the evacuation of the Capitol, just as we have seen extraordinary measures around the White House in recent days, they have no choice, they say, but to take these things seriously and to take some steps in response to them. I would also note, and I don't want to go too far here because we know some things we don't want to tell our viewers because some of our viewers might be of ill intent. There are facilities here on the White House grounds, if necessary, in which the president would be safe, at least they believe he would be safe, from a nuclear attack. So there are places here on the grounds of the White House where they could take the president if necessary, and indeed where the vice president, when the president was out of town the other day, did indeed go to a command and control bunker that is believed to be nuclear proof here on the White House grounds. Seems ominous to be talking about these things, but this is the circumstances we find ourselves in the 60 hours since these deadly terrorist attacks. Again, the White House saying this was a precaution, but the vice president has been moved to Camp David.
Indeed, look at what these terrorists have wrought, not just the World Trade Center, not just the Pentagon and Pennsylvania, but look at what it has meant in terms of shaking up the nation's capital. Now back to Atlanta, Bill and Joey.
Judy, thank you. Many people said we're going to wake up to a new America on Wednesday morning after the attacks on Tuesday, and I think this is a reverberation of that, echoing what Jeff was saying about different threats being called, and all of which has been bogus to this point, and we don't mean to underscore what's happening
or
diminish what's happening in the capital.
Jitteriness.
Yeah. And if you think back 5 years ago, Joey, here in the city of Atlanta in July of '96 when the Olympic Park bombing took place across the street here, that Saturday, it happened on a Friday night, that Saturday and Sunday, there were threats all over the city of Atlanta. Shopping malls and our subway stops here in town and shopping malls downtown all turned out to be just that.
Unfortunately, there are people who would like to take advantage of the worst of situations. On, though, the level of concern, and it's still developing story at this hour, the closure of the New York airports, at least a ground stop at the New York airports because of concerns about some FBI activity today. Patty Davis is following that part of the story now, and she joins us now from Washington again. Patty.
Hello, Joey. Well, the FAA has ordered a ground stop at all 3 airports. That's New York, LaGuardia, and Newark in the New York area. They're saying that is due to FBI activity. Now, what that means, a ground stop meaning that flights are not allowed to take off at those airports. Also, flights that are scheduled to come into those airports not allowed to take off from their originating points. Now, the FAA says on a call just a moment ago that there apparently have been arrests, and we're trying to confirm that. Earlier today, LaGuardia Terminal, the central terminal building, was evacuated due to a scare. A man, according to the Port Authority of New York, made what was interpreted as a threat about a device in his bag. That turned out to be unfounded, but that person was arrested. Now, this apparently involves different FBI activity, different incidents. We don't know exactly what the scope of those incidents are at this point, but there is a ground stop now in place at the 3 New York airports. Joey?
CNN's Patty Davis for us in Washington again. So there are 2 developing stories at this hour that we're watching quite closely. What Patty was talking about, the ground stops at the airports, all 3 of the big airports there in New York, as well as the situation in the Capitol.
Yeah, watching the Capitol, Judy Woodruff informing us both houses of Congress have been evacuated. These are your congressmen and women standing on the lawn outside the Capitol building. The Senate and the House have been evacuated. We will follow this after a bomb threat was issued there. Some reports that a suspicious package was picked up and a dog had what's called a positive hit on that. In other words, the dog sniffed the possibility that that package could be more than just an empty package there on Capitol Hill. We will watch that. Any developments we see here, certainly we will bring you the very latest as we get it.
Of course, the terror strikes in Washington at the seat of the nation's political and military power, as well, of course, in New York at the seat of the nation's, the world's financial power, and that is really causing some ripple effects through the financial community.
We do know the stock market scheduled to open now Monday morning, 9:30 a.m. East Coast time, and for more on that, here's Lou Dobbs back in Manhattan. Lou?
Well, Joy, thank you. Good evening, everyone. And as we begin tonight, we want to tell you that the 3 New York airports, less than 8 hours after having been opened, have now been closed at the order of federal authorities. We are told that arrests have been made at JFK Airport, the international airport here in New York. We have no further information about who the arresting authorities were or who has been arrested, but we, of course, here at CNN will be bringing that to you as soon as we learn the details. And, of course, the U.S. Capitol has been evacuated, as we have now been reporting, the Vice President being moved to Camp David as a precaution, and we will keep you fully informed on those developments as well. 30 blocks behind me, the devastation that was the World Trade Center. Rescue workers now into the 2nd day of their efforts, working relentlessly to free whoever is buried there, alive or dead, from the debris. Their grim search for survivors goes on. Just 2 blocks away from there, leaders from all of the various stock exchanges and the brokerage houses met today. They decided to reopen the markets Monday morning, 9:30. The 4-day closure is, by the way, the longest closure of the New York Stock Exchange since the Great Depression. And those stocks, of course, traded on the exchanges by people. Sadly, some of those people no longer with us. Reopening those markets as soon as it is safe and it is